Paris is not only the city of love and the city of light, but also a destination steeped in over 2 millennia worth of history, meaning that lots of myths and legends have emerged over the past few centuries. In this video, we're going to recount some of the most unusual, unique, and weird stories to have emerged from the city during this time. Père Lachaise was founded in 1804 and was the first municipal and garden cemetery of the city. Today, it draws in over 3.5 million visitors on an annual basis who wish to pay their respects to the 2 to 3 million people who are interred here, making it the most visited necropolis in the world. Of course, among the 2 to 3 million people who are buried here, there are a few really notable characters, and we'll show you some of their tombs today. Nestled within the 20th arrondissement of Paris, the cemetery is actually so large that it has markers telling you which avenue or road you're on. This is the tomb of Allan Kardec, and he was born in the 19th century to a family of mathematicians in Lyon. He was an educator and translator and very proficient in numerous European languages, including Spanish, French, English, and German, and most importantly of all, he was the founder of Spiritism. This was because during his 50s, he became very interested in seances and communicating with spirits. Through this work, he wrote 5 books which have come to be known as the Spiritist codification, and so today his tomb is one of the most decorated in all of Père Lachaise, and you'll regularly find fresh flowers here. We're now on our way to the tomb of Baroness Elizabeth Strogov to Denidov, and it's considered to be the most mystical tomb here in Père Lachaise. The Baroness actually hailed from a wealthy Russian family, but because she died here in Paris, she was permitted to be buried here too. She passed away on April the 8th, 1818, meaning that she died on 8/8/8, and this is where many of the legends that surround her death and also the tomb began, because in mythology, 888 is the code of the gate which opens the world of vampires. This idea of symbology is also carried on through the actual images on the tombs themselves, because there's lots of werewolves depicted and other mythical beasts. In fact, some people wanted to link the tomb of the Baroness to Bram Stoker, but he actually wrote Dracula several decades after her death, and so it's not possible that these two stories are linked. However, the most famous urban legend surrounding her tomb is as follows. The story goes that upon her death, the Baroness did not want to be left alone, and so in her last will and testimony, she said, "For the person that can stay here for 1 year by my side, all night and day, for 365 days and 366 nights, you can receive 2 million francs. And there were a few conditions to this. You could have unlimited expensive food brought to you and other necessities, but the only time you were allowed out of the grave was for 1 hour a day, and that was at night when the cemetery was locked up." Obviously, there were quite a lot of takers for this offer. Unfortunately, though, none of them made it the whole year, and a lot of them lost their minds trying to do so. This is a tomb of Abelard and Eloise, and they were fated medieval lovers who met in 1115. At this time, Eloise was in her early 20s and she was living with her uncle Fulbert in Paris on Ile de la Cité. He was a high up-ranking bishop, and Abelard was also in the church, but he was around 15 years her senior, so he was in his late 30s at this time. He offered to tutor Eloise, who was acclaimed in lots of different subjects, including Latin and ancient Greek, but they soon began a passionate love affair. This wasn't actually discovered until she fell pregnant. Upon finding out about the pregnancy, Fulbert, her uncle, sent her all the way to live in a convent where she gave birth and was banished from ever seeing Abelard again. At this time, Abelard was also attacked and he never recovered from these injuries. They were buried in different corners of France, but were reunited centuries later here at Père Lachaise. Today, Hôtel de Ville is one of the most iconic places to visit in Paris. It's where the main town hall resides. However, during the Middle Ages, this wasn't the case. In fact, back then, this was known as Place de Grève, and it was where unemployed people would gather to seek work. This is actually where the expression faire la grève, i.e. to go on strike in French, comes from. In 1244, this is where a king had lots of people burned at the stake. For the following few centuries, this was the most prominent place for executions in Paris and is where a permanent gallows stood. The most famous case of all was probably in 1680 and was a woman called La Voisine. She was accused of being a witch, a fortune teller, and also a poisoner. Nowadays, you would never guess the grisly history of this square because it's home to a Christmas market in the winter, lots of events throughout the year, and of course, as I mentioned, it's home to the main Hôtel de Ville, which is the chief place where Paris is governed from. The Louvre Museum was once home to the kings and queens of France, and today you can see remnants of the medieval palace in the basement. It's also the largest museum in the world and is home to the likes of the Mona Lisa and the Winged Angel of Cemeteries. The Mona Lisa gained particular notoriety and fame after it was stolen by Vincenzo Perugia in 1911. It wasn't found until 2 years later, and this is when the motive of the theft became clear. Perugia wanted to return the Mona Lisa to her native Italy, where she had been painted by Da Vinci several centuries earlier. One of the more popular myths and legends surrounding the central glass pyramid of the Louvre was actually repeated in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, and it's the fact that the glass pyramid is alleged to have 666 panes of glass, which is of course the sign of the beast. In reality, it actually has 673 panes. Yet another haunting tale pertaining to the Louvre is related to a mummy called Belphegor. The story goes that an archaeologist was looking for mummies and tombs in Egypt and found one called Belphegor. He brought it back here to the Louvre in the 19th century and died shortly thereafter. The story now goes that anyone who sees or possesses the mummy is cursed for life. It's also said in this legend that each night after the Louvre closes and all visitors go home, the mummy comes out to stroll the corridors of the museum. One of the sadder urban legends to have emerged from Paris in the past 100 years or so pertains to the Eiffel Tower. The story goes that back in the 1920s, a couple went to the top of the tower and the man proposed. Unfortunately, the events did not follow as everyone would have imagined. Whether the woman had said no and stepped back in shock, or the man pushed her because he was angry that she said no, she fell off. And today it's alleged that the woman still haunts the Eiffel Tower and is dressed in 1920s attire. The Jardin des Tuileries is one of the most popular parks in Paris thanks to its abundance of little green chairs where you can sit down, the presence of lots of fountains and beautiful flower borders. But when you come here, you should be wary of the red man, because if you see him, this is a sign of your imminent demise. The little red goblin is said to be the ghost of Jean the Skinner. He was hired by Catherine de' Medici in the 16th century as her personal hitman, and after the death of her husband, he would get rid of any oncoming enemy. Unfortunately, Catherine de' Medici soon decided that he probably knew a few too many secrets, and so she hired a hitman to take out her hitman. Today, he's said to wander these gardens in blood red clothing, and you should be wary of him if you ever visit the Tuileries. Ile de la Cité is one of the most popular places to visit in Paris, thanks to the fact that it's home to Sainte-Chapelle, Notre Dame, and lots of beautiful streets. But one street in particular that's very photogenic has quite a dark history. The story goes that in the 15th century, a butcher and a barber lived next door to one another on this road. At that time, students of the nearby Sorbonne University started to go missing. It was eventually found out that the city famous pies that were being sold here on this street actually contained the remains of those students who had gone missing. And so today, be wary if you're eating any meat pies in this district. Quick disclaimer to say I don't think that many of these legends and stories are actually true. The world famous Notre Dame Cathedral is probably the most famous church in the world, but it also has a few myths and legends associated with it. The most famous probably dates all the way back to the 13th century. The story goes that during those days, churches would be built with the altar first, and so the facades were the last door and the last thing to be completed. There was a man by the name of Biscornet. He was a young ironsmith, and he really wanted to prove his worth, and he was in charge of making the doors that enter Notre Dame, so the main doors. And the story goes that at this time, he worked day and night at the furnace to get the doors done. Unfortunately though, it was quite a feat to be able to do the doors, and so he made a pact with the devil. Allegedly, he sold his soul in exchange for making the best doors that anyone had ever seen, and even to this day, no one knows quite how you would have made the metal doors of Notre Dame with tools that were available in the Middle Ages. The other interesting thing is that Biscornet actually means two horns, and so maybe the legend is actually true. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.